victories. We examine the impact of a delayed transitional unity government in South Sudan and the harrowing experience of migrants who have survived a boat tragedy on the way to European shores. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. The state of River Senegal threatened by gold mining activities and putting many livelihoods at risk. And in sport, Liverpool's title hopes in the hands of Manchester City as the English Premier League enters its final match day. Well, in our top story this hour, we start in South Africa, where the ruling African National Congress has officially won the recently held national elections. But the ruling party returns to office with a reduced majority. The ANC now has 230 seats in the National Assembly after taking 57.5% of the votes. As for the voter turnout, 65% of the population went out to cast their ballots. A struggling economy and corruption have eroded the ANC's popularity. Well, South Africa's Independent Electoral Commission declared the country's 2019 general election as credible. The IEC said the elections, won by the governing African National Congress, were free and fair, despite a number of disgruntled political parties calling for a rerun. CGTN's Lindy Mtongana has more.
For the sixth time in 26th year in a row, the majority party in the National Assembly of South Africa will be the African National Congress with 230 seats.
And that's how the 2019 national general elections wrapped up. The governing ANC, with just over 10 million votes, secured 230 seats in the 6th parliament. The ruling party lost 19 seats. The main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, also lost 5 seats. While the third largest political party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, almost doubled their parliament presence, going from 25 to 44 seats after getting 1.8 million votes in the 2019 elections. Millions of South Africans braved the weather and traveled distances to go to their respective voting stations to cast their votes on May 8. Despite the challenges, which included a widely reported issue of some people being suspected of voting twice, the Electoral Commission is satisfied with the process and outcome.
Despite these challenges, it is our incontrovertible belief we have all come through this election even stronger as an institution. We have come through this election even stronger as a people. We have come through this election even stronger as a country.
President Cyril Ramaphosa described the 2019 provincial and national elections as a resounding expression of the will of the people.
Having observed millions of our people across the length and the breadth of our country, casting their votes patiently, enthusiastically and peacefully 3 days ago, we now have a greater appreciation of what President Nelson Mandela meant during his inauguration on the 10th of May 1994, when he said, open quotes, "Let freedom reign. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement," close quotes. This election confirms that freedom and democracy does indeed reign in South Africa.
Ramaphosa also thanked political parties for their conduct during the election. Elections have come and gone, and it's now up to the elected officials to ensure that they deliver on the promises that they made when they were campaigning. South Africans have given them a clear mandate to provide better and quality services for all in the country. Lindy Mtongana for CGTN in Pretoria.
Well, let's bring you some analysis on those elections in South Africa. Joining me now is Mohammed Noor Nordin. He's a political consultant and strategist in Johannesburg. Mohammed, thank you so much for your time. Of course, the South Africa's 6th democratic elections have concluded. Share with us your reflection on the outcome of this year's election. Any surprises?
Thank you so much for having me. I think if we listen to what President Cyril Ramaphosa just said in the snippet before me, he actually really gave a very accurate comment. And that is, number one, the elections were peaceful. It is our 6th election. And South Africa, interestingly, is what I would call an experimental democracy still. We're only about 25 years old, starting the 6th government, The fact that it has been peaceful, the fact that political parties conducted themselves in a very orderly, peaceful manner and so forth. And we have the testimony of our peers globally. I think it is a positive reflection on South Africa, and it shows, that democracy definitely can work in Africa if nations and peoples decide to put their shoulder to the wheel. It does not mean it's not a difficult path. It does not mean there will be no controversy, and this is how political parties conduct themselves. The journey to these elections and the outcome of the elections has not been easy from a political campaigning perspective, from a social interaction perspective, and so forth. But the proof is in the pudding. We had our elections were peaceful, and they've been successful. And the political parties, of course, have all, at least the most relevant ones, have all accepted the outcomes of the elections and the results. So definitely, it's been very positive.
Let's take a closer look at those top political parties, the performance of the top 3 major parties. Obviously, we know the ANC has lost some support, but interestingly, so did the DA. Tell us more of what you think about the performance of those top 3 parties.
Okay, thank you. So, interestingly enough, the top 3 parties, so the ANC and the DA, both, receded. Whereas the third party, which is the Economic Freedom Fighters, they almost doubled their support. They went from 6% to just over 10%, under 11%. What that shows you is that democracy is maturing. The ANC once upon a time had just above 70%. And if you look over a 25-year period, going from over 70% to just under 60%, I don't think there's anything alarming or anything shocking in there. I think it is just a natural progression of political parties. And of a fledgling democracy, as people have more choices, as different political ideas are infused into society, and as different political ideologies grow. That's exactly what we saw happening here. The Democratic Alliance was a party that started out with around 1.5–2% about 20 years ago in the late 90s, and they hit 22% in the last election. And today they're 20%. So it shows, that South African citizens are using the options to choose, to accept you, to reject you. The ANC does not have a complete monopoly on power. Their power is diminishing bit by bit, and they are accepting it. If you look at the Economic Freedom Fighters, who are in a technical way a breakaway from the ANC, and who could be considered a more leftist view of what the ANC has always offered, they doubled their support. So if you take the Economic Freedom Fighters are sitting at around 10%, 11%, and the ANC are 57%, combined, they still make up the majority of parliament, which shows that the ANC with its moderate leftists and the EFF with their more radical leftists still make up the bulk of what South African voters are voting for.
And just taking a closer look at the ANC's performance, are they essentially paying the price for this maturing democracy? They lost a lot of votes. Is there a particular significance to this that we can read into their performance?
Without a shadow of a doubt, the ANC, like any government, being in government, it's not like being in opposition. So when you are in opposition, like the Economic Freedom Fighters or the Democratic Alliance, you basically sit and criticize and so forth. The ANC is a government that has delivered. Notwithstanding that the ANC had many shortcomings over the last 6 or 7 years during the presidency of President Jacob Zuma. And there's been a lot of issues of corruption and so forth in South Africa at very senior levels. But what the ANC has been able to do with President Cyril Ramaphosa ascending the position of president of the ANC and of course the next government, is they've been able to reinstate and re-establish faith in the party. So definitely the ANC is paying a price for some of its misconduct. It is also paying the price for being a chief operating officer of South Africa. When you run a country, you'll definitely have shortcomings, you'll definitely have issues, and the opposition does nothing else than just sit and wait for you to make mistakes, and that is how opposition gets into power. And I wouldn't say they're paying the price for democracy. I think the ANC is maturing with democracy, and hence the ANC has to look in the future on issues such as coalition, better penetration into minorities. They have to look better at service delivery and regulation and poverty, and part of the price of democracy and part of the price of having a majority before and losing it is now that there's to be serious introspection, and they will have to work harder to maintain the majority in government as time goes on.
A lot of hard work then in the road ahead for this Ramaphosa-led government. What do you think are going to become the key priority areas in Ramaphosa's term as president?
I would like to start by saying, there's a lot of speculation in media saying that, that the president and in his person is under fire within his party and there's no cohesion in the party. I think it's very important to dispel that myth. As an analyst, as someone who's connected and speaking to numerous people at various positions within government, within the ANC, the president is very firm in his position. And this is and the president's position in the party is very important in understanding the future of South Africa, because he has a vision which is called the New Dawn, and that basically looks at investment in the country, it looks at eradicating poverty, it looks at creating jobs. And we should remember there's been a global recession over the last few years, and there are a few examples in Africa where economies have been doing well, but overall, the global economy, especially in African economy, is still relatively sluggish. And South Africa is not immune from global trends and so forth. I think the important thing for South Africa is a reputational issue, that the president is secure, the ANC will abide to its policies, and that the ANC government will be clear on where it is going and what its plan is. That of course gives a lot of comfort to investors. On a local level, a national level, the ANC can do nothing else but continue in its numerous programs of development, education, health, safety, job creation, employment. That is what the ANC will be accountable for. And I think they cannot be lackadaisical as they were in the last 6 or 7 years. Them reaching 57% makes it very, very, it will be very risky for them to continue the trend of maladministration, corruption, and nepotism and incompetency. That would be disastrous. And I'm certain that President Ramaphosa will definitely tackle all of these issues.
Mohammed Nuruddin, thank you so much for your analysis, joining us there live from Johannesburg. Let's turn to news now from South Sudan. Today was to be the deadline for the country's two warring parties to form a unity government. However, because they were unable to reach a compromise, they recently agreed to extend this by at least 6 months. The country's president, Salva Kiir, said the government had been unable to disarm, train and integrate various forces inside the country. Analysts say the peace deal they signed last September to end a 5-year civil war has largely held. Around 400,000 people are thought to have died in the conflict. Well, South Sudanese people have been expressing mixed reactions to the delay in forming a new government. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The wait for formation of a new government in South Sudan continues. The more than 2 million South Sudanese refugees who are in the other East African countries due to war in their country are still unable to return home. South Sudan's security situation remains unpredictable. A unity government comprising all political groups previously scheduled to be formed this month is now postponed until November this year.
We are extending so that you don't lose more lives. We are extending so that we avoid going back to war. We are extending because we want to ensure that the security arrangements are completed and everything is set in place so that we avoid the issue of the two armies.
Residents of South Sudan's capital, Juba, have been expressing their views on the delay in forming a new government.
On the violence, the corruption, whatever the government is doing, still on. There's no difference. Actually, if these 6 months is not added, some of these things could have come and stopped. But now, on these 6 months things, which means we are going to have still more killing, the security kind of thing. People are not safe.
Let the government make sure that the security is arranged well, and two, let all the army be under one command. So there will be respect, because the command will come from one person, so that to avoid that mistake of 2016.
In 2016, a poorly arranged security sector led to clashes between forces loyal to President Kiir and the then Vice President and opposition leader Riek Machar in South Sudan's capital, Juba. The fighting took place 2 months after Riek Machar had returned to South Sudan. Everyone here is concerned about security situation in the country, but how it should be handled is where people differ. The East African regional body, IGAD, is urging the South Sudanese people to continue having hope while it works to bring peace back to the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Well, let's review the young nation's push for independence and the hardship it's endured ever since.
An end to conflicts of half a century was declared in 2005. Sudan's government signed a peace treaty with what is now South Sudan, ending one of Africa's longest and deadliest civil wars. According to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, a referendum was scheduled to be held after a 6-year transitional period to determine if Southern Sudan would gain independence. Nearly 99% of the people voted yes. Half a year later, in July 2011, the Republic of South Sudan celebrated its birth and became the youngest country in the world. The same day, the former Sudanese first vice president and Southern government president Salva Kiir signed the transitional constitution and was sworn in as the president of South Sudan. But that peace was brief. Fighting started again when the power dispute escalated between President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar. In 2013, Kiir, the leader of Dinka tribe, sacked Riek Machar, the leader of Nuer tribe. This led to bloody and violent clashes between the tribal militias. Nearly 5 years of fighting resulted in more than 50,000 deaths and 1/4 of the population displaced. The economy, which depends heavily on crude oil production, was ruined. A peace agreement was signed in September last year. It called for an immediate ceasefire. Riek Machar was brought back as vice president after being in exile since 2013. The UN called the signing as positive and significant progress. But problems remain, especially in trust. There has been a let-up in violence since the peace agreement was signed, but it remains to be seen whether it will last or whether it was just a brief, glorious moment while the Dinkas and the Nuers were reloading.
Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. A pro-government militia group in Nigeria frees nearly 1,000 children in its ranks. And the harrowing experience of migrants who survived a boat tragedy on the way to European shores.
For look at some economic details of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN,
see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Nearly 900 children held by a pro-government militia in Nigeria have been freed. Among them, more than 100 girls. They're part of the Civilian Joint Task Force, or the CJTF, which has been battling the extremist group Boko Haram. It's not clear how many children the group is still holding. Deji Badmus reports.
Weeks or perhaps months ago, some of these children and young people were on the front line fighting Boko Haram. They were recruits of the self-styled Civilian Joint Task Force, a militia group allied to the Nigerian military in the fight against the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast of the country. 894 of them are being formally released at this ceremony, in line with an agreement with UNICEF for the militia group to release all the child soldiers it has within its ranks.
I wanted to start by congratulating the leadership of the Civilian Joint Task Force for their commitment, their continued effort to protect the right of children by the separation of 894 children from its rank today.
Following from this ceremony, they would undergo a reintegration program where some would be enrolled in schools and others who wish to learn any kind of trade would be put through a special skill acquisition program. While people are generally happy over the release of the child soldiers, the fact that some of them are as young as 11 has come as a shock to many.
I'm sad to hear this, that so in prosecuting this war, we're even abusing the rights of children. Because the effect is that at the end of the day, in trying to solve a problem, we are creating another problem that could even be bigger than the problem we intended to solve. So for me, I'm not too pleased to hear this news that, some children were recruited to fight Boko Haram. I'm happy that the right thing has been done. I only hope that the Nigerian government will do the needful in addressing the psychological and the psychiatric treatment of those young boys and girls, such that tomorrow they will not become a menace to the society.
More child soldiers are still being expected to be released at a later date, but this is surely going to spark a debate, especially among child rights advocates in the country who have been very critical of the government for allowing the militia group to recruit child and young people into their fold in the first place. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, today marks International Nurses Day, and in the Democratic Republic of Congo, China's 22nd batch of peacekeepers has held a performance to celebrate the day. The Chinese Blue Helmets are part of the United Nations Organization's stabilization mission in the DRC. At a hospital in Bukavu, the mission commander thanked them for their dedication. The highlight of the show was a demonstration of battlefield first aid by the team's nurses. The peacekeepers also performed songs, dances, and traditional Chinese martial arts. Let's go to Tunisia now, where as many as 70 undocumented migrants have drowned off the coast of Sifax. In response, the Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights has called on the European Union to adopt a more humane approach regarding migratory flows to EU countries. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi has more on that story.
At least 70 migrants drowned Friday following the shipwreck of their boat in international waters, 40 miles off Sfax. 16 survivors were rescued by fishing boats.
Two bodies recovered from among those who died by drowning in the attempt of irregular migration were transferred to the forensic department at the regional hospital. A third body was found and transferred with the 16 survivors to the coastal city of Zarzis.
The migrants, who are of sub-Saharan origin, sailed off from Libya. Authorities say the number of victims could rise, as the recovery of bodies by the National Navy is still on. The bodies were transferred to the Sfax Habib Bourguiba University Hospital.
Libya has become a platform for illegal migration. The insecurity in Libya reigns. It favors the spread of the phenomenon. People are fleeing poverty and economic difficulties. Libya and Tunisia cannot stop the wave of illegal migration.
The Tunisian Forum for Social and Economic Rights, FTDES, denounced what it described as the European Union's failure to comply with international laws and conventions on rescue and immigration, blaming it for future human disasters off the Mediterranean coast.
This tragedy is the inevitable consequence of the EU's restrictive and inhuman migration policies. The approach adopted by the EU member states is purely security and is leading Europe towards a withdrawal into itself at the expense of compliance with international immigration conventions.
The regional authorities in the city of Sfax have expressed solidarity with the families of the victims and survivors of this recurrent human tragedy of the Mediterranean.
Tunisian activists stress the need to address the issue of migration on the basis of an analysis, addressing its root causes, which are directly linked to justice, peace, development and human rights policies, far from any security approach. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, some of the survivors from that boat tragedy in the Mediterranean are still reeling from the shock at a rescue center in Tunisia. Libya's west coast is a main departure point for African migrants hoping to reach Europe with the help of human traffickers.
Survivors of a migrant boat which capsized in the Mediterranean Sea after leaving Libya are receiving treatment at a Red Crescent center in the town of Zarzis in Tunisia. The tragic incident is one of the deadliest shipwrecks involving migrants trying to reach Europe this year.
For approximately 8 hours, people were in the water, in the freezing cold and amidst high waves. A Tunisian sailor saw them and informed the Tunisian Coast Guard unit about the incident.
The survivors are said to have come to the center in harrowing mental states.
Because of how many people were on the boat, the Zodiac started filling up with water. It then sank and capsized. This was 12 o'clock at midnight. We kept floating in the water until 8 o'clock in the morning.
The majority of the nationalities were from Bangladesh. According to their paperwork, 51 of them turned out to be from Zuwara in Libya, but only 14 of them survived. There were also 9 Moroccans and only 1 of them survived. Out of the 3 Egyptians, only 1 survived as well. The rest were from the other African countries and none of them survived.
From the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees numbers, in the first 4 months of 2019, 164 people are known to have died on the route. And according to the International Organization for Migration, 2,297 migrants perished or went missing in the Mediterranean last year. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
Well, the UN-backed government in Libya has given 40 foreign companies 3 months to renew their operating licenses. The government in Tripoli issued a decree to suspend companies earlier. The list includes French petroleum giant Total. The step has been seen as an attempt from Fayez al-Sarraj to put pressure on Paris over its support for his rival, Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar. Here's Adel El-Makhrawi with more.
Fayez al-Sarraj has been calling the international community to force his rival Khalifa Haftar to withdraw his offense against Tripoli. But after an apparent indifference from Europe and USA, al-Sarraj seems to have taken an alternative approach. Suddenly, his UN-backed government in Tripoli has suspended some 40 international companies, among them 3 French giants, Alcatel, Thalys, and Total, which pumps more than 1 million oil barrels a day from Libya. His plan may have worked. President Macron has called for an international supervised ceasefire in Libya.
France appeared to have been supporting Haftar, convinced with the Egyptian perspective. This we were surprised during the al-Sarraj's European tour, that Paris is announcing a different stance towards Haftar's military offensive.
The firm's list includes Germany's Siemens, USA's Microsoft, and more firms in the power and infrastructure sectors from other nations, including Italy. Some licenses had been expired since 2008. However, the government of National Accord didn't take any action until Sarraj's European tour. The 40 firms issue was purely administrative that has turned into an influential political tool. Al-Sarraj's government has taken a step back, giving these companies 3 months to renew their licenses, and he may not still have the support he needs to stop Haftar's offensive against Tripoli. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's coming up in business. The state of River Senegal threatened by gold mining activities and putting many livelihoods at risk.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice. In your business news, a new study by the International Finance Corporation says the private sector can use its assets to better support refugees and host communities to be self-sufficient. The findings by the IFC suggest there are alternative ways for private sector companies to support the more than 70 million people that have been forcibly displaced globally.
Wars, violence and persecution have forced millions of people to flee their homes. Many have found refuge in camps around the world.
The last time I visited Syria was in 2014 after finishing high school. I wanted to continue my education and go to university in Syria, but I couldn't because of the situation. So I registered as a refugee because of the crisis, but I still hope to return to the country and get my master's degree there.
A study conducted by the International Finance Corporation examined more than 170 private sector initiatives focused on refugees and host communities in Africa and the Middle East. Data was collected on business ownership, access to finance, telecommunications, education and employment. The findings show that opportunities from private sector investment can promote self-reliance, financial independence and empowerment of refugees.
To a large extent, particularly when you go into protracted refugee situations where people have been there living in camps or similar areas for years and sometimes for decades, just relying on a purely humanitarian care and maintenance approach that provides goods and services to refugees and considers them as passive receivers is probably not a sustainable solution.
Syrian refugees living in Jordan have benefited from opportunities provided to them at the camps. Ihab Kawati is one of them. Through an education program here, he has managed to learn and has become a full-fledged web developer and an entrepreneur.
IPKT Argo is a youth initiative primarily aimed at directing youth capabilities towards innovation using modern technology like internet and artificial intelligence. At the same time, we teach them how to transform ideas into pioneering projects. To be able to help the refugees in the long term, we must provide them with tools and show them how they can use the new digital tools to solve the problems they face. This can enable them to develop their own projects, which could generate a good income for them in the future.
IFC hopes its study will raise awareness across key private sector areas and continue to show that a market opportunity exists to help address challenges faced in refugee camps. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has commended China for its support in helping Nigeria address its huge infrastructure deficit. Chinese companies are carrying out various infrastructure development projects across the country and providing thousands of jobs in the process. Receiving a delegation of the China Railway Construction Corporation at State House in Abuja, the president of the country said China is not only helping to rebuild infrastructure, but is also bringing technical expertise to Nigeria. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
Almost everywhere you go across this country, you're very much likely to find Chinese companies involved in carrying out massive infrastructure projects for the government. Chinese companies are currently involved in infrastructure projects like rail, roads, airport terminals, power, and a host of others. So when that high-powered delegation of the China Railway Corporation Construction, led by its chairman, came calling at the presidential villa, Mr. Buhari used the occasion to commend China for the projects being executed by Chinese companies here, describing their efforts as genuine. The president also said he would give special attention to all the projects. Now, CRCC is currently undertaking several construction projects in Nigeria worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The projects cover railway, dry ports, free trade zones, and construction of highways in different parts of the country. The company says it has around 18,000 local employees working at its various project sites and plans to create additional 40,000 jobs with upcoming projects. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Nigeria and some other oil producers in Africa are set to benefit from U.S. sanctions on Venezuela and Iran. This as the United States aims to double the volume of its oil imports in May 2019. Reports say Nigeria, alongside other countries like Iraq, Brazil and Angola, are set to deliver their crude oil to the United States in order to ease up heavy crude oil demands in the country. Here's CG10's Deji Badmus once more with what that means for Nigeria.
The news could not be coming at a better time for Nigeria, which is seeking to ramp up as much revenue as it could to fund its national budget. The United States' monthly import of Nigerian crude has been on a downward spiral, hitting a four-year low of 539,000 barrels per day in February, and that's according to the Energy Information Administration, EIA. Analysts say the sanctions on Iran and Venezuela offer Nigeria and other oil producers on the continent the opportunity to reverse the trend.
It will be a temporary increase in revenue for Nigeria and other countries in Africa that produce oil of the type that America wants to buy. But there's nothing of a long-term nature or of any strategic value in that. So countries like Nigeria may just take the opportunity to sell a little more quantity that America is willing to buy. But Nigeria or any other country cannot plan on that.
It remains to be seen how much quantity of Nigerian crude the U.S. would be seeking to buy. Since 2010, when it bought 358.92 million barrels of Nigerian crude, it has not imported anything close to that figure, thanks in large part to massive shale production.
We should also be looking at long-term plans for our crude, either by way of export to other markets, which the Nigerian government has been doing or NIPs has been doing for quite some time, or also the refining of Nigerian crude. Because I'm one of the believers that Nigeria should not perpetually be exporting crude oil. We can do a blend. That is, we still be exporting crude oil, but we should be refining substantial proportion of our production here in Nigeria, either to meet our supply and even overcome this problem of importation of petroleum products. And we could sell to some other African countries or even sell to other countries.
The U.S. used to be the major market for Nigeria's crude, but that is no longer the case, and it's doubtful this new demand from the U.S. would return it as the #1 market for Nigeria's sweet crude. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
You're watching Africa Live. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, how a reproductive health voucher project is helping to improve care for pregnant women in Uganda.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice. The Senegal River, which flows across 4 countries in West Africa, is being heavily threatened by artisanal gold mining. The intergovernmental organization responsible for the river is concerned about the consequences of the mining activity on the quality of the water, the flow of the river, and the destruction of the riverbed.
Thousands of gold miners invade the sites of Kédougou in southeastern Senegal every day. They work with manual and traditional processes. The erosive action due to the dredging of the banks of the Senegal River and the use of chemicals constantly pollutes the water and contaminates the soil. This poses a threat to the populations living along the river.
Today, the hydrological regime of the river has changed greatly because of the discharge of all kinds. The neighboring populations cannot even drink this water, and it is frustrating to live close to such a large river and know that it can no longer be used overnight, neither for drinking nor for market gardening.
Most gold miners come from Guinea, Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Gambia, Cote d'Ivoire and Niger.
To wash the minerals we mine, we pump water from the river that separates our 2 borders. Once we have washed and extracted the gold it contains, we dump the tailings and the dirty water into the riverbed. We have no other space to store this waste.
Pressure is mounting to find quick solutions to the rising levels of pollution.
To combat the use of chemicals, border controls need to be strengthened. Pollution takes place on both the Malian side of the border and the Senegalese side. The hardest thing in the fight against this problem is the lack of coordination of our 2 forces of repression. When we chase out the miners from Mali, they flee, cross the river and find themselves in the Senegalese territory, and vice versa.
The Senegal River has its source in Guinea and waters 3 other countries, namely Senegal, Mauritania and Mali. 50 to 60% of the water consumed in Dakar comes from the Senegal River, while Mauritania also draws almost all of its drinking water resources there. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
Uganda's reproductive health voucher project is helping to improve care for expectant mothers. The project, dubbed the Magic Voucher, helps women access antenatal care at a subsidized cost. So far, over 150,000 mothers have benefited from the project. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
Harriet Wayonda checks in for antenatal services. But doctors here have discovered she also has malaria, which could affect her pregnancy. She will spend a night at the hospital. In order to manage her medical bills, Harriet has purchased a health voucher.
This card is helping us a lot. Even if you don't have money, the health workers will attend to you.
A voucher costs about $1.06. The government sells the voucher at a subsidized cost to pregnant mothers. Expectant mothers here can now access care at an affordable fee. Health workers here say the system is helping women have safe deliveries and also reduces on maternal death. The voucher has 4 coupons that caters for all antenatal visits. And each time a pregnant mother visits, a coupon is stripped off.
Poor women in the communities have been having a challenge to access maternity services, either from the private or sometimes the public. And so this program is coming to make sure that we remove the financial barrier. We pay for their bills, and they are able to walk in the facility and get a service.
Statistics from Uganda's health ministry show that for every southern birth, there are just over 3 maternal deaths. It's now hoped that this new initiative will bring down the numbers.
Actually, the number of delivery here on voucher, it goes to 100. That is a month. We can get that. Yeah.
The project, funded by World Bank at a tune of $17 million has been running for 4 years now. It's being piloted in the western and eastern part of the country. Health officials now plan to roll out the program countrywide with hope that the lives of more pregnant mothers like Harriet could be saved. Hilary Isga, CGTN, Eastern Uganda.
When Cyclone Idai ripped through central Mozambique in March, heavy rains caused flooding that tore through various communities and destroyed everything in its path. Many of the victims were young children who sought safety on top of high buildings waiting to be rescued. As the world marks Mother's Day, we revisit some of the survivors of the storm who are eager to rebuild a future for their children. And to the fashion industry in East Africa, a Tanzanian male model with a rare skin condition is pushing back against stigma and even self-doubt by pursuing a modeling career. Let's take a look.
Miko Deo loves to play football and skateboard like many young Tanzanians living in the commercial capital, Dar es Salaam. But Miko is different. 15 years ago, his skin began to change, and he's looked distinctly different ever since. Miko has vitiligo, a condition that occurs when cells that produce the pigment melanin stop functioning, leaving white patches on the skin.
Everyone have unique things. Like me, I have a skin, it is my unique. Other guys, they have eyes, blue eyes, you know, so we are different. So everyone is unique. So if you want to be like someone, you can't, because he's unique.
Model and spokesperson Winnie Hallo has helped bring vitiligo to the limelight, pushed back against stigma, and expanded the scope of beauty. Miko is now a celebrated model too.
You know, in Tanzania there is no anyone like me. So when few people saw me, I mean designers, they chose me because I'm the first one and I'm the only one. And that is opportunity I got. And the challenge is I'm the skin model, you know. So when designers wanted muscles model, it's hard for me to get a chance to do a job.
Last year, Miko was selected as Tanzania's top male model at the prestigious Swahili Fashion Week. But when he isn't in front of the camera, the 23-year-old loves being behind it.
He actually brought to the industry a different type of uniqueness, a different type of beauty, and which inspires a lot of people out there who don't think that they can make it to the fashion industry.
The modeling industry has for decades championed the perfectly perfect beauty. Only recently, with effort to reflect the real, has the beholder's market been celebrating the perfectly unique beauty. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. Liverpool's title hopes in the hands of Manchester City as the English Premier League enters its final match day.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Sports news now. We start with women's football. South Africa's Banyana Banyana is taking some time out from World Cup training to learn French. The team travels to France in just a matter of weeks to